Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us here at 4:30. 6 days and counting. That's what is left before the current state budget is supposed to expire. If a new budget is not in place by the end of the month, the current funding levels will remain in place. Despite that narrowing window, optimism is the operative word in Madison today, at least from Assembly Republicans, and that includes Representative Ben Franklin of De Pere, who was at a news conference before today's afternoon session with GOP leaders, including Speaker Robin Vos, who claimed there was still enough time to craft a budget before Monday's deadline. As we've discussed many times, if that new budget is not in place by then, the current budget remains in effect until the new agreement is reached. Now, yesterday, you may recall, the governor implored Republicans to return to the negotiating table and get this done.
I had a discussion with Governor Evers this morning. So we're staying in regular communication as we continue to work through it. I think the most important thing for us, though, is to figure out if everybody wants to be at the table so that we have the ability to finish our negotiations. That's the most important part, because it takes 3 people to tango in this circumstance, right? You got to have the governor in both chambers.
All right, so where do we stand now? With this deadline looming, we turn to a familiar face to answer that. And we welcome in J.R. Ross, of course, the editor of WisPolitics.com. So let's just start with what we heard today. Read the tea leaves a little bit for us, J.R. What did you make of what the Assembly Republican leaders had to say?
Robin Vos is trying to say that, hey, we're there to work with the governor. It's the Senate Republicans with the problem. He said that he spoke with Governor Evers this morning. They're ready, some Republicans, to finish the budget, but they need, quote, 3 to tango. And what's happening right now is there's trying to be a little of a gamesmanship about who's to blame for this and what's going on and why it's delayed. And Robin very much wants to look like this is all being held by Senate Republicans. But you have to understand the dynamic of those caucuses. They're very different. Leadership styles are different, and for Senate Republicans, there's been a question all along this process. How do you get a budget, if you wanted to, that was conservative enough to get 17 GOP votes alone, but also get Evers to sign it? And that's almost an impossible thread to walk. You get it done, but then if you try and get Democratic votes, you open the door to losing a lot of Republican votes. And so for Devin LeMahieu, it's a kind of a tougher nut to crack, getting his caucus on board with a bipartisan budget.
At the time of us talking here this afternoon, we haven't heard any reaction from the Senate on this. Do you anticipate any reaction from Devin LeMahieu?
We'll see, but the message has been that these talks have been going in a way of too much spending, too much of this and that Evers wants is unacceptable. And the message is we can't do something that agreeable to Evers without losing a lot of Republican support in his caucus. And, people focus on Chris Kapiga of Delafield, for example, or Steve Noss of Whitewater. They've raised concerns about the budget, but there are other members of caucus who have concerns about a budget that spends too much in their minds, or taxes too much, or doesn't return enough in tax cuts. So he's got a tricky dynamic versus the Assembly, where we haven't heard much dissent so far in that caucus. We've seen little bits of flare-ups here and there, but nothing as serious as the Senate, because the Senate, you basically have 18 Republicans who are independent contractors. They all kind of work independently of each other and make demands because each one holds a great deal of power in whether things get done. And so it's very different dynamic than it is in the Assembly right now with how things are progressing.
It was interesting. We heard from pretty much everybody who got in front of that microphone today for the Assembly leaders. They used the word purple. They used the word bipartisan. They really tried to paint it that we all want to work together. But yet they haven't quite reached the level that the governor wants in some of these important issues. For example, child care. They said, yeah, we're willing to put money towards child care, but it hasn't been enough. And yesterday we heard Governor Evers say he would veto an entire budget if it didn't have child care counts money allocated in it. Is that the only line of demarcation, you think, JR, for this?
Oh, no, use the word purple. Governor Evers wanted $3.3 billion with a B for education, K through 12. Republicans in the Joint Finance Committee had $330-some million with an M, right? So I don't know that Governor Evers thinks that's a bipartisan budget. He sees that as a Republican proposal as unacceptable. So that's the challenge here. Where is the mark you can get that Evers is on board? You don't lose so many members where you kind of have dissension in the ranks. This may seem kind of an odd concept at home where people want lawmakers to work together, but when you run a caucus in the legislature, you want as much as you can to rely on your own members to pass anything. Because once you rely on votes by the minority party, you embolden them, A, to ask for things, and B, it loosens your grip on your caucus because, if you're not going to listen to me, listen to them, what's going on here. So it can be a challenging dynamic sometimes to try and reach bipartisan compromise. It has happened before. We saw it with the Bucs Stadium way back when, the Brewer Stadium a couple years ago, shared revenue, a deal for state aid local government. So it's happened, but it is not often that you see big bills pass on bipartisan votes without the majority caucus having majority of its, enough votes by itself to pass that bill on the floor.
Well, you mentioned public education funding. They haven't even addressed UW system funding yet. We've heard talks that they want to cut some $87 million. Now, that didn't seem to be the rhetoric that we heard today, but there's still a very, very wide gap. How do they get this done? And in the short amount of time here, because we heard Robin Voss and others today say, Jeff, we can get this done in a few days.
That's debatable at best. Just logistically speaking, even if they came in tomorrow and worked through the weekend, you're not going to get a bill on the floor of the legislature by June 30th, Monday, which is the end of the fiscal year. It takes usually around 5 days to a week just to draft the bill itself after Joint Finance finishes at work. So let's say even in the best case scenario, they finish next week. It'd be, early, mid-July before it passed both houses. And that's if you got a deal. And also don't forget, there's no real pressure right now to get a budget done.
Right.
Yes, symbolically, end of the fiscal year on Monday, that's, you missed that deadline, but things operate as is, as long as there's a budget. So we need a new one for that. It could drag on for weeks, if not a couple months then, because it used to be you would get pressure from school districts because they want to know how much we're going to get an increase to set our budgets. Well, the governor's veto in the current budget, the 23-25 budget, gives them an increase every year of $325 per kid between state aid and property taxes. They know what they're going to get right now under state law. Local governments used to always start pressuring lawmakers in the fall because, hey, we need to set our budgets. They now get an automatic their adjustment to their share of revenue at state aid through a formula approved 2 years ago tied to the sales tax collection. So there's not great pressure in that way. Now others, they have demands, they want to see things, but there really isn't a big, this has to happen now, which leads some to believe, and you get all kinds of theories in the Capitol, but some have told me, hey, if it's not done this week, it could take a couple months. It could be the fall before we see something done. I'm not going to predict that happening, but there's an attitude of some on the Capitol of, there's not a real pressure here. I'm going to wait till I get what I want.
So what's the next signal that we should be looking for here, JR? Because as of us talking early this afternoon, there's no scheduled meeting, another meeting set up for the Joint Finance Committee, and I would assume this stuff can't get done without at least going through the Joint Finance Committee, and they don't even have anything on the schedule right now.
Yeah. So one, is there a notice from Joint Finance to meet? Two, does anything happen where one of the houses tries to break out on its own and do a budget by itself? And I've not seen that happen before, but it's theoretically possible that you could see, let's say the Assembly, for example, say, we're going to do our own budget. We're going to pass it, kick it to the Senate, we'll go that way. Not predicting it, but those things that people I talk to are watching for is one, just Joint Finance going back to work, and B, I've heard some rumblings lately of, okay, might there be a drastic move by somebody to try and kickstart this process and get it moving again.
All right, we shall see. JR, thanks as always for the time and the insight. We appreciate it.
Anytime.